Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Knots. This has been one of the most debated hot topics around Bitcoin. There's been a lot of different point of views. We've watched a lot of different videos from different people, different perspectives. And what we really want to accomplish, I think, in this video, we're going to try to do an unbiased take on Bitcoin Core versus Knots, and really do a deep dive on both sides, trying to understand their point of view from Knots, their point of view from Core, without taking sides, without slandering anybody, without acting with too much emotion. This has been one of the biggest requests that we've had for Maple Bitcoin. People have been looking for our opinion on this. And so really what we want to do here is just have a chat. There's going to be no real agenda with it. There's going to be no biases. Hopefully we're going to do our best to remain neutral. And that's kind of the why for me, is that I just want to understand this better. And I think that both you guys probably have a better grasp on this than I do. And so I have some questions. We have got a lot of different topics to get through today. And I just want to understand it better before really trying to influence other people, I guess, about it. And I want to make sure to keep an open mind with all this stuff. I do think that this is very important at this stage of the game because we are so early in this whole journey. And so I think it's just going to be a good exercise to talk through. So I'm really excited for this. Hopefully people get a ton of value from just hearing both sides of the story instead of just the person that you subscribe to. And so that's kind of what we want to do here. So I kind of want to get your guys' view on this as well, like why you think that this is important to have a debate like this, or not a debate, I guess, more of a discussion.
To me, it's important because you don't know what you don't know, right? For me, it's I'm not a tech expert. I'm not a computer science expert, and I don't have like a programming background or anything like that. But I think that this is an important topic for everybody to discuss, even if they don't quite understand the topic, because your decision to run a node is extremely important here. If you run a node, and let's say we've seen videos from people saying that the Bitcoin blockchain could be used to store things that we don't want on there. If you're running a node and you don't understand that that's the potential outcome, then you could be making a decision that could put you in jail for the rest of your life, right? And you don't want that. We don't want you to have that. I don't want to go to jail for the rest of my life, right? So I think that it's really important to look at this from different perspectives, to understand this from both sides, because I know people on the Bitcoin Core side of things are adamant on saying that, yeah, Bitcoin Core is the thing. But there are also people on the side of Bitcoin Knots who are never going to run Bitcoin Core again. And that's perfectly fine. I respect both sides, right? My goal here is to learn as much as possible, because I think that this is how we progress as humans. If we're not learning more, then we're not growing, we're stuck.
Yeah, and for me, I just want to ask questions, and that's how we learn, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think we should be asking ourselves why there's so much tribalism, so much political backlash from this proposed change that's going to be implemented in the new version of Core. We should ask why there was this change of something that has been in there for 11 years. There's been an op return limit. Is, again, another question: is it a good change? Is it a bad change? Right? And then this is affecting on some level the technical side of Bitcoin, but we're seeing more of the change on the social side of Bitcoin. Right? We've seen a lot of people switch over to Knots because of the perceived downgrade to Core from certain individuals, and so they're switching over, right? And that's a social change. That's a decision from individuals that are Bitcoiners. So why is that change happening? Why is it such a big drastic change? And for me, asking questions is how we all learn. So, Jor, you said you had some questions. I'm happy to go into those, and we can kind of bounce around and figure out, like, what do we know? What do we need to know? What is unclear, right? Because I think that there's still a lot of things that are unclear. I think some people have some just basic view of this. They think this thing good, this thing bad. That I've made up my mind here. But I think we need to all learn as much as possible about this.
I think it's also important to consider that the fact that the number of nodes for Knots are increasing massively. And if you know that that's happening, you're probably wondering why. But if you don't know, then you're just ignorant to the issue, right? And we want you guys to not be ignorant. Anybody who's watching this video, we want you guys to do your own deep dive. Don't just trust us. Don't just go based on what we're saying. Do your own deep dive. Spend your own time looking into what the problem here could be. There's a reason for why Bitcoin Core, or sorry, Bitcoin Knots nodes went from 0% or like 1% to 18%
Yeah.
within a few months.
And it's a similar reason, like this is all giving parallels to the block size wars of 2017 or 2015 to 2017. That was a technical change, right? That, you know, resulted in a hard fork eventually, but it was all happening at the consensus layer, people trying to convince people of different merits, of different changes, of all of this. And we saw that nodes ultimately decided to do a user activated soft fork instead. And I think that this is a similar situation. I mean, it's not going to play out exactly the same. It doesn't need to, but it's a similar social reaction of Bitcoiners saying, this is a problem. How are we going to solve it? Right. Spam on the network is spam on the Bitcoin blockchain is always going to be an issue. That's one thing I think that that both sides could probably agree on, is that there's always going to be spam in the Bitcoin blockchain. But what form does it take? How easy is it? And what direction are we going towards? Are we fighting that? Are we not? Is it just a database? Is it only for monetary transactions? Is there ability to filter? All of these kind of questions come into play here around the spam debate, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that when we're dealing with something like Bitcoin that is decentralized in nature, which means that there's no centralized power who's hiring people to filter this kind of stuff and make sure that this isn't coming onto here. Bitcoin doesn't have something like that. It doesn't exist. And so when you have centralized parties, they also take on the liability and the responsibility for the things that are being put into there. And Bitcoin doesn't have that. So to me, that this stuff is, you know, when we're factoring that, it is cool that we have the vote in this. And that's what I like about Bitcoin. It's like, for me, Bitcoin changed my mind in a lot of ways in terms of voting, even like voting for a political party. I love the quote that says, voting is the adult version of writing a letter to Santa Claus, because that's how I really feel right now. I feel like my vote doesn't have any sort of implication on what actually happens.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I feel like the cool thing is you do have a vote. And that's the one thing that I've taken away from this, is that there's been a lot more people start learning about this who had no idea about it before. There's been a lot of people running a node now that weren't before. And that is a step in the right direction, I think, if that's what we want this to be.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of people are saying like this is potential for a doomsday event with Bitcoin, or Bitcoin is really, really in danger here, which may or may not be true to some respect. But I do think that you're right, that there's this massive silver lining of people starting to care about running a node. And I know from personal experience, because I have a node, how to run a node series, that like I just got a handful of emails yesterday about how to run nodes, asking me all these questions. Today, one of the people responded with a screenshot of them running a node, running Start9 on their old PC, all this stuff, right? So people are out there. Like I know I'm probably responsible for dozens of people running nodes now, at least.
Which is pretty cool,
It's
considering
pretty
the
cool.
percentage would be pretty high, even though it's just a dozen, or even if it's more than that. The reachable nodes is not a high number, so it's like a decent percentage.
Yeah.
Can we start with why people should run a node? I think that's really important, just because it gives you the fundamentals of what we're talking about here. Why should people run a node? What is a node?
Yeah, maybe quickly, like, what is a node?
Yeah. Okay. I'll take that. Sure. A node is essentially a computer, a device that you are running a software on. So the reference client is Bitcoin Core, and that is the main node that people are running, is Bitcoin Core, different versions of it. So there's different little upgrades or changes along time. Bitcoin Knots is another type of node implementation that we've referenced here that is growing in adoption. It's at 18% of the total network. There's a few other ones that Libra Relay and a couple other ones that are really, really minor percentage of the network. And basically this type of software, what it does is it connects you to the Bitcoin network, and you start downloading all of the history of the blockchain from your peers. So it connects, like if you've ever used like a torrenting software, it connects you to peers that have data, and then those peers start delivering that data to you. You start downloading it and validating that it's true from a source of peers. And then once you've caught up to where we are in the blockchain and you're starting to look at future transactions, you have something called the mempool, which is basically a waiting room for future transactions. And the way that works is if you're running a node, you can create a transaction and input it into your mempool. And because you're connected to peers, peers will see that transaction, and if it's valid, they'll accept it into their mempool, and then they're connected to peers, and those peers will see that transaction and accept it into their mempool, and that it spreads out to the entire network. So you're relaying transactions, and it's not just yours, other people are doing the same. So your node is part of this giant network, this mesh of computers that are connected to each other. They're all communicating constantly and saying, okay, these are the transactions. And your mempool essentially starts to create what is the expected block. And then when a miner that is running a node is and contributing to hash rate to the network, when they solve the algorithm and they hit the hash and they're chosen to create the block, they'll build the block based on their template, and your template will be slightly different than that. And then it adjusts and changes and takes in the transactions it doesn't have or whatnot. And it creates that block and adds it to the blockchain. That's the immutable blockchain. And then the story continues, continues on and on.
So from a very left side of the bell curve view of it, you're basically, if you're running a node, you're downloading an updated copy of the blockchain, which is every transaction that's happened since January 3rd, 2009, the Genesis block in Bitcoin. You have record of every single transaction that has happened since then that have been organized into blocks. And your node, your software, your computer keeps a copy of that. That's why you need a certain amount of storage in order to run a node and download this copy of the blockchain. And every 10 minutes when there's a new block that comes out, it's relayed to your node as the updated ledger that everybody agrees on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, that's great. And I talked a lot in there about mempool because that's what the core and knots debate is. But and that's one part of the node as well.
And so the mempool, maybe just for people who aren't as technical, mempool essentially, when you send a transaction, if you were to set up a Bitcoin transaction, you wanted to send some of your sats to somebody else. When you sign that transaction and you broadcast it, the first place it goes to is the mempool. And it's kind of like a waiting pool where all the transactions that are waiting to be put into a block, that's where they sit. And whoever constructs the block and forms the template and mines the block gets to decide which of those transactions from the mempool get placed into a block.
Correct. And it's based off of their mempool configuration of their implementation. So that's what we're talking about here is a lot of the change. Well, I mean, should we get into the change that Core is wanting to do? Because I think that sort of relays into it a little bit. So
can we go first into a little bit more about the Bitcoin protocol and like what it's supposed to actually do?
Okay.
Like I think that's really important because that's what people like. Most people may not understand this, right? So the Bitcoin protocol is just a set of rules that govern the functioning of Bitcoin, and then in that protocol that you have, like the reference implementation that you were talking about, within that protocol, you can change. What I don't know, maybe I'm explaining this wrong, but I guess you can change how transactions are processed.
You can change what transactions you accept into your mempool,
right?
Essentially. Okay. So you always have to read the transactions, and then you can decide whether to keep them in your mempool or not. So, and then if you have those transactions in your mempool, you'll be relaying those out to the peers, the other nodes that you have connected to. If you don't have those transactions, you won't be relaying those to the other peers. That's just a configuration setting within your node of what you accept within your mempool or not. And if you're a miner, this is really significant because if you mine a block and you have configuration within your mempool policy to not allow certain types of transactions or to allow certain types of transactions, then those transactions are likely to go to either go in or not go in to the block that you've mined.
So in this case, like this is the base layer here, right? And then everything like the implementation, because we don't need, at the end of the day, we don't need Bitcoin Core. We just need something that allows us to govern this set of rules, right? So we can use something like Bitcoin Knots. We can use something like Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core is just one of many potential Bitcoin implementations, and that could change. And I think that's what's so powerful about capitalism, right? The best thing out there is the one that people will use. If the best thing out there starts to go against their values, then we can go to something else. Like, let's say, for example, if Apple says something like, um, you can't access the Play Store unless you give us your ID, or the App Store unless you give us your ID. I mean, I don't know if that's the case already, but if you can't do that, then people will start moving away from from Apple, right? So I guess Bitcoin Core. Tell me if that's right. Bitcoin Core is just one implementation, and we can change that at any time. And the new implementations of Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin Core, each of them have their own pros and cons. And the goal of all of them is basically to just make sure that this happens.
Yeah. So what I'll say here is that as long as you're running an implementation that has the same consensus, like the consensus layer of Bitcoin, there's all these rules within Bitcoin that are fixed. 21 million, the supply issuance,
These
the
are
estimated block, all of that stuff is fixed and within the implementation. Then there's sort of these adjustable things that are not consensus changes, and that's what goes into mempools, right? It doesn't matter to the consensus layer. It doesn't say the rules of the mempool policy are different than the consensus layer rules. So the core wants to change the limit of the max size of op return, which is a space within a block for a certain type of data. The consensus layer of Bitcoin doesn't care about that at all. Like, you could use an implementation. If you're a miner, you could use an implementation that doesn't have that cap on it, and you could mine a transaction and it would still be valid if it has a higher op return than what Core currently has as its limit, or Knots has as its limit, or anybody else is running as their limit, because that isn't fixed into the consensus layer of Bitcoin's code. That is a mempool policy layer, which is different.
So would I be right in saying that this argument between core versus knots is this? It's about this right here: the blockchain technology, a public ledger that records all Bitcoin transactions. So what it's an argument between is what should a transaction be?
That's part of the argument,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think. That's maybe part of the argument, but it's kind of loose because I think Core and Knots both agree that Bitcoin should be used for transactions, for financial transactions. I don't think anybody here, like very few, and I would say actually probably really bad actors are the ones saying, oh, we should open this up and make it really usable for spammers. I think the vast majority of Bitcoiners on both sides are both anti-spam. They just have different ideas of what these mempool policy changes will do for the use of spam, or like how it'll affect spam that ends up in the blockchain, or non-financial transactions that end up in the blockchain. Some people have varying definitions of what that even is. Some people say there's no such thing as a spam transaction. So there is a little bit of, like, there's a whole spectrum here. People say there's no such thing as a spam transaction because if it's consensus valid and they paid the fees to get in the block, then they're a valid transaction. But I would say that's not what Bitcoin was designed for. Yeah, you can do that, but that doesn't mean that we should facilitate that, because it makes the use case of financial transactions harder. So that's what I would say there, if that makes sense.
Rajat, you showed something before we started this. I think that was kind of interesting. Do you want to go back to, I don't know if you still have it handy or not, but just to show, oh, he's gone. Never mind.
See ya.
I was going to ask him to bring up that.
He's back.
There he is.
Hey, sorry about that. I clicked the wrong button. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Is it the chart?
Yeah, just showing like the number of nodes going up, because I think that is kind of important. That's what we alluded to right off the start, which was the fact that the number of nodes has been going up, dramatically in the last year or so, which I think is a very positive sign here. So you can see there, the top one, I believe that's total nodes there, the blue one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the yellow one, the gold or whatever that is, that's the people who are running core. And then the bottom one, it's kind of hard to see there, but the lime green one at the bottom, that's the people who are running knots now. So it's kind of cool. It's really cool to see this whole thing play out and to hear different sides of it, and just to show kind of like the, almost reminds me like a poly market in a way, where they eventually we might hit a flippening here where there's actually more people running knots. And I think that that's one of the things that we actually want to get into today is what are the implications of that? What does that look like? If that were to happen, what are the implications on Bitcoin? So this is kind of a snapshot of where we are today in terms of the total nodes, reachable nodes, who's running core, who's running knots, and what could happen in the future.
So do you guys think that Bitcoin? So if we don't have this conversation and people run the wrong Bitcoin implementation, what do you think could be the what do you think the implications of that could be on Bitcoin? Do you guys actually think Bitcoin is under attack in this? Like, what do you guys think here?
It's really hard to predict the future, but I think that it could be detrimental to the use case of Bitcoin. It could fill it full of spam that people don't want to have on a computer at their home, and that would incentivize less people to run nodes, making it less decentralized, making it less valuable as a network. So yeah, I mean, it's possible. I don't think people are, I mean, it's hard to know, but I don't 100% think that there's malice with the people wanting to make these changes where they are actually trying to destroy Bitcoin. I think that it's just their opinion, and they actually don't think that it's going to destroy Bitcoin. They think it's good for Bitcoin. So I think that there's just varying degrees within there, but it's possible. I mean, Bitcoin is ultimately software, right? And I would say that that is where it's the most vulnerable. Is that these software changes could have knock-on effects. Like we saw that with other changes to Bitcoin, right? SegWit was a change, and it was designed to make there was a discount, a SegWit discount to basically consolidate UTXOs, making the UTXO set smaller, but it was exploited to make spam cheaper to do in certain ways. So I think changes to software have unforeseen knock-on effects, right? Like a downstream effects. And I think that we should be really cautious to change something that has been in there for 11 years. And I don't know if Core was as cautious as they should have been to make this implementation change. And I think that's not an unbiased thing to say, because you can see the reaction from the node runners, right? It's gone from 1% Bitcoin knots to 18, right? So I'm not alone there. There's a lot of people thinking the exact same thing, that regardless of the knock-on effects and the downstream effects of all of this, a lot of people are just thinking this is too fast of a change, too drastic of a change. And this is me signaling that by running knots instead. Regardless of how much effect I'll actually have on the end state of the blockchain and filters and all of this, this is me signaling to the Bitcoin network, the social network, that I don't agree that we should make this change as quickly and as abruptly or at this level than we are.
Boys, I'll be right back. Someone's knocking on the door right now.
Okay.
BRB.
Okay. So we know that we know that there's a certain decision being made here. Some people don't like it, other people do. Do you think that over the long term this can completely change how Bitcoin works? Do you think that fewer and fewer people could end up running nodes because of this? Do you think that do you think that this could have what do you think the knock-on effects of this would be, if you have anything off the top of your head?
Yeah, I do think that the downstream effects of this change are potentially really bad. I don't know if it destroys Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin probably pivots. I think Core probably. I think there needs to be some changes that could happen that would reverse this, not reverse what has happened during this time, but make it so that the future is brighter in this way, and admit that there was a mistake made. I think even with past changes to Bitcoin, there's been very slow rollback of changes, or like non-existent rollback of changes that ended up having negative downstream effects. But those things should be evaluated. Should we change how these changes were implemented, now seeing that they do have negative effects. So I do think that's possible, right? If this goes through and enough people adopt Core 30 and there's 100 kilobyte op returns and those become bad and create less incentive to run nodes and all of this, then I think with enough reaction to that, that we can change course and we can fix that. So it does throw like a little wrench in the certainty of the future of Bitcoin. That's what I would say. How it
Yeah.
all plays out, it's really hard for me to see. And there's people from both sides, but I would say there's people from the not side who really think that this is a really, really bad idea. That this could destroy Bitcoin. That 80% of people, like, yeah, somebody said that 80% of people need to run nodes for Bitcoin to be successful. I don't agree with all of that, but I think there's room for different opinions with all of these kind of things. But yeah, there's a lot of people that think that this is really cause for concern for Bitcoin's future, for sure.
I think one thing that this will change, along with everything that you said, one thing on top of this that it'll change is it'll probably make the developers less confident, right? Meaning that so today they probably think that, oh, Bitcoin Core it's already won the race and we can do whatever we want to change it, and it probably makes institutional efforts a little weaker, because at this point right now, maybe before this happened, like before you saw that change in how quickly Bitcoin Knots was being adopted. Before that, they probably thought, oh, we can do whatever we want to. Bitcoin Core is already set. They've already won the race, and nobody can change. Nobody can change that. And now maybe that'll stop them. Maybe that'll stop people from being as impulsive, I guess, in
Yeah.
making decisions. Right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible. I think that it should, and I am really curious to actually know what these developers think. Like, there's got to be a little seed of doubt. Like, oh, did we make the right choice here? Like, there's a lot of pushback against this choice and this change. Is the reference client like position of Bitcoin Core in jeopardy from the adoption of knots? I think there's still a lot of denial. Like, there's a lot of people that say, oh, these knots nodes are AWS spun up servers and cloud service and whatnot, which I think it's probably a very small percentage. I know, unfortunately, there are people like running like multiple instances of Bitcoin knots. Like, I follow this one guy on Twitter that has like 6. He's just like keeps buying computers and running knots, and I'm just like, bro, stop spending money on that and buy a miner instead, and really have
Yeah,
like,
what's the point of that? What would the value of that even be? I don't even see. I don't. Do you see value on that? I don't really.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't know
It's
why
like
this guy
having
does
fake
this.
followers on a social media platform.
The only slight, okay, so there's two justifications for it. The one, I think both of them are weak. I think the justification is that you're signaling, like, you're contributing to the amount of reachable knots nodes, so you're signaling the higher percentage of adoption, and that Core has made a mistake. That's one thing. The other thing is that you, as a node, if you're connecting to peers, you're not relaying the transactions around. So you might be doing what is referred to as, I believe, like a Sybil attack, which is that you're surrounding, or maybe you have the potential to surround a node and only feed them transactions that you've deemed worthy of being in the mempool by having filters. The likelihood of that is very little, because at 18%, you're still likely going to connect to a node that hasn't filtered to the same degree as you, and then you're going to get those transactions anyway. So those would be the two reasons. I think both of those reasons are really bad reasons to run multiple instances of knots. I think if you want to have more, if you want to have more contribution to the effect of Bitcoin, the network, that you'd run one instance of knots, and you would make that an economic node. If you really cared about being on the knot side, right? You would make that an economic node. You would do transactions with it. You would validate your own transactions, and you would probably get a little miner, or and then set up Datum gateway, contribute. to either ocean, to decentralized mining, and have your mempool be what gets to create a block. If you get the if you do solve the if you do hit a block, you create the block that you want to see, and you don't add spam to the blockchain, or you solo mine and have a lottery ticket there. I think that is
Yeah.
a much better use of resources than running 6 old PCs with knots on them. I think it's a ridiculous thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so let's go into the pros of either one of these implementations. I think that it's important to discuss the pros of and cons of each, regardless of what side of the spectrum we believe that this should go into. I think that it's important to understand the pros of core versus the cons of core. So the pros of core, from what I know, is that they've been around for a while. They have a lot of developers. It's the Bitcoin implementation that's getting the most support. But then the con for that could be that they could be, I guess they could be coerced to do things that aren't the best for Bitcoin,
Or
right?
complacent. Yeah,
Right.
there's also that same argument you had before of, oh, we're sort of invincible, we're the champions, we can do whatever we want. So that's sort of a level of complacency as well. So that would be another argument against. But yeah, they could be coerced. Like there could be a financial incentive. There could be, bad actors, right? Like if you wanted to attack Bitcoin, doing it in 51% attack, not even really possible at this stage,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Um, if you wanted, there's again a Sybil attack, spinning up a bunch of nodes, not really that effective. We can really kind of root out, oh, these nodes are bad actors. Let's cut these off of the network. This kind of stuff. Kind of not a good way to attack Bitcoin either. The easiest way to attack Bitcoin is to get a bunch of malicious people involved in the dev side of it, maintainer status, pushing commits, merging pull requests, all this kind of stuff. That would be a way to have a real effect on Bitcoin in a negative way. Not saying that's happening, because really that is speculative. If you do think that is happening, it's not to say that it is or isn't happening, but we have no real hard evidence of that being the case. But it's totally possible, right? But again, that's also possible on the NOTS side too. Like if you make that argument against core, you have to make that argument against NOTS too, because you also don't know if these people are compromised as well that are making the changes, right? To be fair, right? Trying to be unbiased here.
Yeah, I think that's
So
actually really important because you
yeah,
don't know if, like with Luke Dash, I don't know what his last
Luke Dasher.
Luke Dasher. So if we don't know if he's been compromised, and we don't know if there's some kind of corporate entity that wants Bitcoin knots to grow. But who knows? I mean, you don't know either way. You don't know what somebody's intentions are. I think there was something else that you were mentioning before we even started recording. You were saying how there are younger people who are maintainers and developers who want to leave their mark on Bitcoin. I think as I get older, I've started to realize more and more that most people are just going to be average, right? I mean, they're not going to have like these crazy lives of celebrities. Like nobody's going to be remembered regardless of what happens. Luke Dash is probably going to be remembered for a very, very long time, right? If more people are trying to make changes to Bitcoin and they're trying to change it and they're trying to do something to it that will make it so that their name is known forever, you have to do crazier and crazier things, right? I
Yeah.
think Bitcoin. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, you don't want to just, if you get into the inner circle of Bitcoin Core and you're pushing, changes, you don't want to just be somebody that's like maintaining things and just sort of a fly on the wall. I mean, you might if you're sort of a genuine person and that is all that you're contributing, but there's a real incentive as an individual to do something that makes a change so that you're part of the history of Bitcoin, which you probably believe in Bitcoin to some degree, considering you're a dev in there, and you will want to be a part of the history of something as powerful as Bitcoin will be, or is today and will be in the future. So I think there is a natural incentive, and this Yeah, I told the story off camera, but I'll say it again that, Staler got a lot of backlash for basically, I think it was Kathy Woods. He was telling not to fund Bitcoin development with some portion of the ETF, the Bitcoin ETF that ARK has. And his reasoning has been, or he didn't say his reasoning for that, but he has talked about how the biggest risk to Bitcoin is ambitious, enthusiastic devs that want to make a name for themselves, that might not even have that much skin in the game, or might not actually care about the future of Bitcoin, but really just want to elevate their own personal status, right? If you're a core dev to Bitcoin and you make a change that's significant, it gets some news, blah blah blah, you could go on to get a pretty lucrative job somewhere else, probably within crypto. Would be, there's a lot of money in crypto, unfortunately. So that's a possibility. Again, this is speculation, but definitely not outside of the realm of realistic risks for Bitcoin.
Sorry, boys. I had unwanted guest there at the door. You would never believe who it was. It'd be, actually, you probably could figure it out. An unwanted guest at the door who you have a hard time getting rid of. Just the worst timing. And this is the first time that's ever happened in the 3 years that I've been out here. So perfect timing for that. Anyways,
wait, so who was it?
It was a Jehovah's Witness.
JW. Yeah,
did
that's
you
what I
guys see
said.
that I was
You got to get a
ring
cam so you can yell at them to go away. No,
I have one. That's how I knew they were here. Actually, that's what I was looking at on my phone.
Wow.
But I didn't. They weren't. They didn't show up in suits or anything. It was somebody in a vehicle and a nice. Yeah. So, anyways,
this is a complete tangent. But have you guys watched Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
there was a part where there were Jehovah's Witnesses who came to his house, and he was
oh yeah, cooking.
He was under the influence. And
he thought they were bikers, motorcyclists.
Yeah, and he thought that they threw a grenade at him or something. That's crazy.
Okay, so sorry, boys. I missed a little bit there. So what are we talking about right now?
So we're talking about the pros of core, the cons of core, and why they're removing filters. We talked about, is Bitcoin actually under attack already in this debate? Is there an actual
right?
Is there a potential for Bitcoin to actually fail because of this? So what do you think are the pros and core of cons of core? So you weren't here, so I guess you're gonna think of things on your own here.
Yeah, I think that going back to the original one there, do I think that it's is Bitcoin under attack because of it? Like, what are the long-term implications of this? Could it wreck Bitcoin? I agree with Forrest. I didn't have a chance to hear what you said on Rajat, but I do agree with Forrest in the sense that we really don't know. It's almost reminds me of like a butterfly effect, where you make such a small change and has a huge impact kind of in the future. It's impossible, I think, for us to know the long-term implications of it. The one thing that I don't like about the change is how fast they're trying to do it. I would say that that's a con for me of downloading core, a reason why I wouldn't. I also think that if what I've heard, the thesis is on this in terms of letting things that might be illegal or unwanted into your house, essentially into your server that you're running this off of. It just seems like it could be more fuel for the mainstream media. And then I think that that's been one of the biggest things that Bitcoin has struggled with, is that when you say the word Bitcoin, people have this very, very negative thought about it. They just view Bitcoin from such a negative lens because of the mainstream media and all that they've done. It's been like a 16-year negative marketing campaign against Bitcoin. And they've never had this fuel before in terms of using this issue against Bitcoin's development and Bitcoin's progress. And I think that if you introduce this, even if it's right or wrong, as we know with the mainstream media, they don't really care. They'll take this and they'll run with it and they'll blast it out to millions or billions of people. And the millions and billions of people won't take the time to learn the implications of it and if it's actually legitimate or not. And that's going to be a very negative lens that people are going to see Bitcoin from once again. And I do feel like that this is going to go on be an ongoing battle for probably the rest of our lives, is fighting the FUD and the BS from the mainstream. And I just feel like this is more fuel on the fire that they could potentially use against Bitcoin and reasons to run a Bitcoin node, which I think is a bad thing, because what we want here as Bitcoiners, we want as many people as possible running nodes. So that's kind of my long-term implications of what this could be.
Yeah.
Pros of core for me would be just the fact that you know, actually I don't really know if I know of any pros of core, which is kind of weird to say. The one would be the fact that they do have more eyes on it, or more people maintaining it, I guess. Is that what they're called? Maintainers of Bitcoin Core? 5 versus 1. I don't know if we've covered that yet or not. But 5 to me is better than 1, even if you think like a Bitcoin multi-sig. 1 is like a single point of failure. 5 is, there's still a possibility that people could collude and people are bad actors and they work together in that. But I do think that 5 is better than 1 in that sense. And I feel like that's one of the main selling points that the core side has, is that they want it to be decentralized. They don't want it to come down to one maintainer, because that to me is more vulnerable.
So the counterpoint to that is that if you have one maintainer that has integrity, right? So the maintainers of GitHubs and code bases are ones that can actually put through a change and fully commit and merge a change to the code. If you have one maintainer that has integrity and is the best developer of all time, let's just Steelman or look at this example like this, and then you have 5 maintainers of a different code base, and one of them is corrupt and they're able to push through corrupt changes, then that's actually a challenge, because it's not like all 5 of them have to agree to a merge. They all just have the ability to merge, each one of those maintainers. And then there's all sorts of other devs that can push commits within there. So even with knots, there's, I think, like 2 other devs, but they don't have maintainer status of the GitHub. So I don't know. Again, that's just a way of looking at it in a different lens. I don't think there's a perfect solution. I don't think it's a democracy within these systems either, but I don't think there's a perfect solution of how many maintainers there needs to be to make it efficiently decentralized, because I actually don't think it really decentralizes it that much to have more maintainers.
That's fair. I think that from my perspective anyways, I mean, if we're talking about like the perfect maintainers, let's say that there's 5 perfect maintainers versus 1 perfect maintainer. I feel like I would still lean towards the side with 5, just in case, somebody falls down a different road or is compromised or blackmailed or whatever that may be. I like the odds of having 5 there, but I see your point in terms of it only takes 1 bad egg in that bunch to push something through, which is kind of what we saw with this maybe. But
and even just to convince other people that what they're doing is right.
Right. Yeah.
And so the other thing here too is that this is open source software. So even with the fact that there's 1 maintainer of Knots, you can download Knots and you can be the maintainer of Knots 2.0, right? You can be the one maintainer of Knots 2.0. So that's sort of some of the power of like the open source, free and open source software system. In reality, it's not really like as effective. Like, if you were to do that, like nobody's going to just start running your other version, your forked version. Like, it doesn't really make a difference or really affect anything. But that's just another aspect of this.
What if they did though? That's one thing that I've been wondering myself, is like, because from my perspective anyways, somebody who's never met the majority of these people, if any of them, like in real life, what if it was somebody different than the main maintainer of Bitcoin Knots? Like, what if it was, let's say, a very respected person within Bitcoin? What if they decided that they actually wanted to start their own copy and paste open source, start their own? I feel like that would be better, because there's kind of baggage on both sides of this, and I feel like that's one of the main drawbacks that I've found with it, is that there's so many personal attacks based on what this person said, what this person did 5 years ago. I feel like there's a lot more baggage being brought to the table versus just like objective facts. And I think that that's actually working against Knots a little bit more than it is core, in a way, because of who the maintainer is and some of the interactions and things like that. But what if there was like somebody who came in and said, we're going to run this I don't know,
but there's no single person that is free of controversy in any way, because controversy can be created, right? Like a lot of the attacks against anyone on either side is just like cherry picking or making stuff up. Like, oh, you have an issue with this, well, that must mean that you are connected to it in some way, right? Like it's just made up BS, right? And I would say that the other thing too is like that's exactly what did happen, right? Like Luke Dasher, on multiple occasions, has basically saved Bitcoin with some code. He's contributed huge amounts of code base to Bitcoin Core throughout his time, and he created a fork. He was he's highly respected. There's obviously tons of people that don't like all sorts of different things about him, whether it's his opinions or his religious beliefs or actions he's done in the past as well, or even changes that some people think are good and some people think are bad. But he was a highly respected coder that did fork off Bitcoin Core and made his own version, which is Bitcoin Knots. Like that's exactly what happened. It's just he's a controversial figure, and I don't think that there's any single person that wouldn't be a controversial figure that does this.
That's fair. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
So did you I'm guessing you guys shared your pros and cons of both?
Yeah, we went through the pros and cons of Core. Let's go into the pros and cons of Knots.
Yeah. I think we should. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the pros and cons of Knots. Again, so the Knots is like 98% core, right? So it falls into consensus. It works really well with all the other nodes that are running core. There's no problems with that. There's slight changes to the configurability of your mempool. That's the main difference. So you can change what op return size you want, all sorts of different stuff within the mempool policy. And I would say that's a pro, right? If you want to have configurability, if you believe that certain types of transactions are valid when other ones aren't, not consensus valid, but just like you agree with them or not. And you can't, it's not, so these, we kind of need to get in the filter debate at some point too. Like what is a filter? Yeah, so then the cons would be that it doesn't have the Lindy effect that Core has, right? I mean, it kind of does because most of it is Core, but then it also has these changes. And when you change something, there again can be unforeseen, knock-on effects. So would it create a chain split? You know, like are these changes that significant to Knots? I don't think they are. I don't think that is going to happen, but these are all sort of risks, right? Changes to code, right? You're running something that isn't as proven because it hasn't been ran as long, would be one of the arguments against it. Again, the same argument of having one maintainer, multiple devs now, but there used to just be one dev as well. What other
in that sense, like, because I'm thinking we're going to rely on you more for this one, for the pros and cons. What would happen in a sense of if it was 50-50, let's say that number from Knots grew to 18% and Core dropped down to 50%. So it's 50-50 people running Core Knots. What does that look like? Is it sustainable that way? Is that a problem in any way?
Yeah, it's totally sustainable. I mean, it's everything's still consensus valid. There would just be less relaying of certain types of transactions. So like 50-50, you're still likely, you're connecting to a host of different peers. You're still likely that you're going to connect to a core node that's going to have all sorts of different transactions. And if you're also running a core node or whatever implementation that doesn't filter it out, you're still going to get the vast majority of those transactions in your mempool if that's what you want. So there's not really any major difference. And that's sort of like the argument against filters being effective, is that you're just filtering your own mempool. Like it's just this temporary space, and then it's just going to end up in the blockchain anyway. And everybody that wants those transactions are going to just get them from other peers that don't have the filters. So people will say they're completely ineffective in that way. But yeah, maybe we can get into that later or something. But yeah, no, nothing would fundamentally change as far as I understand.
And what about, let's say that knots grew to, let's just do a couple hypotheticals here, because I think this is useful for me to think through anyways, selfishly. But let's say that knots grew to like 70-30, or it flipped where it's 80% people running knots and 20% running core. And there is still only one maintainer, which is Luke. And he decides that, or somebody finds something on him and they blackmail him and he's compromised and he pushes through something and he's the only maintainer of it and he pushes it through. And now you have this whole thing going in reverse now. Like, is that a potential issue in the future if there's only one guy who's responsible for making these changes?
Yeah. So, okay. So that's actually really interesting. So there's multiple different things there that we can talk about, but I think one of them is that there's no forced updates on this software.
Right.
So if you're running core and you have a problem with core 30, you could switch over to knots if you wanted, or you could continue running your version of core.
That's another point I wanted to make. So
Yeah.
let's put that on pause for a second. But
Yeah.
for the other part, in terms of like, if most people started running knots and then Luke made a change to it, he pushed through a change that wasn't necessarily best for, or he slid something in there and like, I don't know, like maybe nobody caught it and people updated it. And then, something like that. If there's less eyes, I feel like are worse for Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure. But I think proportionally, as there's, and we can already see this, as knots has grown, there's been more eyes on the knots code.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if it grew up all the way to 70%, there would be a very clear argument to make this the reference client and to make, because it's the primary implementation that people were using. So then it would become the Bitcoin implementation that everybody uses, and it would have all the eyes, and there would be discussion of, okay, is having one maintainer the way to go, or can we add more? Right. There's been times in Core's history, right? Satoshi, he was the one maintainer, right, of Core, the original Core implementation. He gave power over to Gavin at some point, and then Gavin had a lot of control to push through merges. And then when he stepped away, and there ended up being a team, and there was a lot less changes going on because there wasn't consensus. If there didn't reach consensus, they wouldn't push it through, and all of this. But sort of back to that point, like, there's nothing forcing you to update to this version of knots if Luke gets compromised and he's the only maintainer and he makes a change. So you don't have to upgrade to that if you believe that change isn't right. And there would be enough eyes on that to say, hey, why are these changes happening? Just as this has happened with Bitcoin Core, right? Why is this change happening? I don't agree with this change. Other people do, right? And so you can not upgrade, or you can make a change. You could fork it. You could update, but then change that change and then run that implementation, right, as an individual, or you could promote it and have other people run it too. That is possible. Yeah. And then the other thing that would happen too, right, as I kind of alluded to, is that if Bitcoin knots was 70% of all the nodes, it would be the reference client. So then it would be, again, have all the eyes and be what people are sort of wanting to run to have the safest version of Bitcoin, because it's the most within consensus of everybody else that's running Bitcoin. The other thing that would happen too is there would be more likelihood that all of the nodes that you're connected to are running knots, and they would have some type of filter on them. And so even if you were running core, you were one of the 30%, you might still not be connected at some point to another core node, and you might have a lack of all of the available transactions in the mempool. And if you're a mining node, that means your mempool doesn't take in those transactions, and then therefore, if you hit a block, you don't put those transactions into the blockchain. So the more dominant knots becomes, the less the transactions that get filtered out basically the more effective filters become, the more knots there are. Because there's less relaying of the transactions that are filtered up. That's another knock-on effect.
So, but then back, because we're kind of on this topic already. So that was another question I actually had, was if I was running a node before all this controversy happened, and I just decided that I'm not really clear on which direction I want to go yet. I don't want to spend a bunch of time, even though it's not even that much time to switch from core to knots. I could just not update my node ever, right? And I would never be contributing to the version 30, V30, if that's something. So is that possible for somebody who's running a node right now to just not update? Would it be any different of running knots?
It's possible. Well, yeah, it would be different than running knots because there's different configurability with knots already than core, whatever the version of core is. It's realistic to be able to do that for a certain amount of time, but if there's certain bugs that come up, certain vulnerabilities that come up, if there's an OS change, like an operating system change, you might need to upgrade to the new one. It's probably more foundational than just like an operating change, but like when we went from like 32-bit to 64, right? Like there needs to be some changes to the actual software, and that sort of forces you to upgrade. So just saying like, oh, I'm just not going to upgrade and that's a solution. It's a temporary solution. There's a reason that Bitcoin Core still needs maintenance. It still needs slight changes that are just allowing it to still be used essentially at certain points.
Right, because if let's say I was running version 29 and then 31 came out with like something that had an issue with 29 that's now fixed, I would have to upgrade to 31, which would also include the upgrades from 30.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's just not a realistic long-term like solution to think that that's a possibility.
Interesting. So that was the cons of knots, the pros. Can you think of any more that we might have missed in terms of pros and cons for knots?
Yeah, so I think we should kind of get into like the changes that Core wants to make, because right now Core knots, as you said, like, oh, I can just run my old Core node. It's very similar to knots. Like there are differences, but the main contentious change to Core is changing the mempool filter from a default of 80 bytes. So allowing transactions that have an op return of 80 bytes to allowing transactions into your mempool that have 100,000 bytes of data, so 100 kilobytes. And this is a change to the default, and then it's depreciated as well, which means that likely it's just going to be completely set that way in the next upgrade after that, Core 31 or whatever. That's typically what happens with these kind of things. And that's a pretty drastic change going from, and so we've had since 2011, there has been either a 40 byte limit, always configurable, but a 40 byte limit, and then an 80 byte limit of op return space. So that's been a filter that has been in the version of Core up until this new version that's going to come out. So that is really the big change and the big difference. And then you can debate whether this is a pro or con to be able to do bigger or to be able to have in your mempool transactions with large op returns. And knots essentially has the configurability. So that's like the benefit. The pro of knots is like you could also accept that if you wanted. You could change the data carrier size to 100 kilobytes. Like it's you have the power within knots, which is what I actually really like about it. You have configurability that isn't going to destroy Bitcoin if you configure your mempool differently, because all it's doing, it's really not having. It can have an effect. I mean, it more so has an effect if you're a miner, or if there's enough of them, again, to only be the peers connecting. But like you're having an effect on what you're allowing into your mempool. And I think that is power that an individual user should have. I don't see any problem with not having that ability. Like getting rid of configurability of that. Why? That's my question. Is like why? And that's sort of like we should. I think actually where we should go with this really is the reasoning for this change. Like, so Core wants to make this change because op return can be pruned. So if somebody puts spam in the op return of a block, if you're running a pruned node, you can cut that out, and it isn't going to increase the size of your pruned node. Whereas there's more harmful in their eyes, which it's actually fairly objective. There's more harmful ways to introduce spam into the blockchain, and one of those is with fake pub keys, which is essentially creating a UTXO of some data, right? Some arbitrary data, whether it's.
Could we explain that? Because I heard it a couple times first, and I was trying to make sense of it in my head, but I think that I understand it now. So let me just tell me if I'm right or wrong here. If somebody were to create a transaction and they put in a fake address, which would essentially, wherever they sent that to, that would create a new UTXO in that fake address. And that's where they could store their data based on that fake UTXO. So even though there's no real sats moving back and forth, or maybe that's where I'm wrong here, but like if I was setting up a Bitcoin transaction and I send some to this wallet and then some to this address, so there'd be, fork there, but then I create a fake address there, and that's where I put spam into there, and that's how I get it into there, sneak it into a transaction essentially. Is that kind of right?
I actually don't know fully like the ins and outs. Like there's still some knowledge gaps that I have. I don't fully understand how like fake pub key spam works. That's definitely a knowledge gap I have. So like the technical side of that, I don't know. But I do know that type of spam cannot be cut out of pruned nodes. That's the major issue with that. So yeah, unfortunately I can't fill in the knowledge gap for you there, because
sorry to cut you off there. Yeah.
That's all right. But the problem with these other types of spam, fake pub keys being one of them, is that it creates a larger UTXO set. So whatever the spam looks like and ends up being, or however people do it, that needs to be something that you store in the UTXO set. And if you're running a pruned node where you're actually just holding a certain amount of the blockchain space, you still have to hold the entire UTXO set, which is being bloated by spam like fake pub keys. But again, sort of the other side of the argument there. So that's Core's argument, right? Is like Opportun is less harmful. So let's allow spammers to spam within Opportun, which has always been the case, right? That's why there was Opportun to some degree, and there was sort of a limit on that. Was, hey, this is the garbage can. You can put some garbage in here, or what some people will perceive as garbage, right? A little note or some identification or some piece of history or whatever the hell it is, right? You can do that in Opportun, but there's a limit to how much garbage you can put in the can. They're essentially saying, okay, we're turning this little waste basket into a dumpster, or a landfill. You can put all sorts of garbage in here now, because it's less harmful for pruned nodes. That's one argument that Core has, right? And so you can agree with that or disagree with that. And I think, I've heard Mechanic even say, like, there is a reason to change Opportun and stuff, like, but to some degree, and even Adam Back, who's sort of taken the side of Core now, he campaigned for changing the Opportun limit to 160 bytes, right? So there's sort of these reasonable sort of arguments and at this side, but to like fully kind of blow this up is maybe like a step too far for some people, right? Like even the people on Knott's side that are saying, we need to discuss this more. Maybe there still needs to be a limit, but maybe we can make the limit bigger, right? It's kind of the similar debate that happened with the block size wars, right? Like there was people on saying like, okay, we do need to make the blocks bigger for more throughput, but like we don't need to make them 4 gigabytes and 8 gigabytes and all this crazy shit that all these shitcoins made, right? So yeah, there's nuance within there, because technically, again, Opportun is less harmful for spam, right? Because it can be pruned out. But the argument there also sort of begins to fall apart, because Bitcoin isn't really designed to be using pruned nodes. It's very difficult to use them. Like the software has been built for running archival nodes, an Electrum server, connecting all that. Prune nodes just begin to be very challenging to run and be effective at all the things that you want your node to do. So yeah, it's easier with spam in Opportun because you can prune it out, and your prune node isn't going to be giant because of the UTXO set. But what is the use case of prune nodes at this point? Like, is this what Bitcoin's going to become? Everybody's just running prune nodes, and we make prune nodes really usable, and archival nodes we just forget about, and the Opportuns are all blown out. I don't know. That doesn't really jive well that well with me. I mean, I'm just kind of trying to look at it both sides, but like the argument sort of, in my eyes, sort of falls apart a little bit. But that's one of the arguments of why they should do this. The other argument is that, again, this is not a consensus change. So people can go around mempool policy, and they already are. And so they're doing something like Marathon's slipstream. So they're directly inputting or giving their transaction to a miner. And then when that miner or that mining pool has that before everybody else does, and they include it in a transaction, and then all of a sudden every other node that is competing to create blocks doesn't have that transaction, they need to source that transaction, and there's a delay for getting that information, and the miner that included that transaction already had it, and they're working on the next block. So there's an advantage, or sort of the idea of centralization, or an advantage to the miners when there's these out of bound transactions. So by increasing the op-return limit, it would incentivize people to just do that through their own node, and everybody would have these transactions, and there would be less use case for going out of band or around the mempool policy, which creates these centralization problems.
So wait, so would removing the filters get rid of that centralization problem?
Hypothetically, because instead of needing to use Slipstream, you could just upload a transaction with 100 kilobyte op return, and it's going to get relayed around the network, and then any pool is going to include it into their block if they're running Core 30.
Could we look at that? Could we look at that thing that you showed before for us? Or did you guys touch on this while I was gone?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, we can look at it here. I'll bring it up.
Yeah, let's look at Mara's slipstream just so people have a better idea of what it is. And then because this has been part of the argument from Core side in terms of, well, you can do this anyways through this, or right? Like that's the kind of the argument that they have there, is that people have a way to do it anyways.
Yeah, people can do it anyway. So that's part of the argument of why people are saying filters are not useful and they don't work, is because people can go around them. But that's like saying a fence doesn't work because somebody can climb over it. It's like, it's harder to climb over a fence than to walk through an area that doesn't have a fence, right? So this is the example of this here, and it works really well. It's 14 sats per VByte to upload a transaction to Mara, and I don't have mempool up right now, but it's probably 7 bytes. It's usually about twice as much. So just as it's a lot more effort, right, a lot more energy to climb over a fence than to walk through an open gate, the same is for this, right? There's more energy expenditure, more cost to add in a transaction that is not a regular transaction.
Yeah, the last block was about average of 6 sat per byte.
Yeah. So it's about double usually. And then the other thing here that I thought was really interesting, I don't know if we want to get into this right away, is that there are some terms here in Slipstream that are filters. I went past them here, I think. Sorry. Oh yeah, right here. So A to E, all of these are, maybe it's legalese, and how much due diligence Mara is doing on the transaction, I don't know. But you can see here, number 3 is really a point of contention right now with people that are pro knots, is the ability to, in op return, upload serialized data that can be illegal content, right? Think of a JPEG that would be illegal to own. But Marathon has this caveat within using their product that you're not allowed to do that. So you can't go out of bound and use a product like this and get illicit content into the blockchain. But if everybody was able to, or everybody was running Core 30, or enough people were running Core 30 that miners were using it, and somebody uploaded the data that was under 100 kilobytes and it had illegal content in it, there's no centralized body like there is with Marathon filtering that out. It's sort of just general, and they're just going to include it because it just looks to them like a regular transaction. They're not evaluating every single transaction that goes into it. They're just saying, oh, this is a valid block, or this is a valid transaction, and they're paying me this amount of money, and I want to include it because they're paying me to include it. They're not looking at what's in there. But yeah, Marathon might look into it. I don't know, or they just say you're not allowed to. I don't know, but
Yeah,
that is in there.
legal
Yeah.
jargon. Although, I
be.
mean, realistically, if they did include some illegal content in there, they probably would be in a lot of shit. So I'm
Yeah.
guessing they take this probably pretty seriously, and I feel like that's one of the main arguments that some of the core people have, is that they don't want to be censoring transactions. Who are we to say what can go in here and what can't, right? And so it's clear that somebody who is on that side, Mara, is censoring content and transactions and data that can go in there and can't.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here is like the idea of some people are saying filters are censorship, and it's really just like all you're doing with a filter is this really dumb form of like what you allow or what you don't allow, right? It's like data within this part of the block. I'm only allowing this much data within there, so that's not censoring an individual or an organization or even a type of content. It's just filtering how much data is allowed within this space, like that. So it's like a really dumb form of it's yeah, it's just filtering. Like it's not you're not specifying what you will or will not allow besides just data amounts. So the censorship argument really kind of falls apart in my eyes, because you're not targeting anybody. You're not allowing certain types of content. You're just saying, I'm not going to relay this type of content. Like this content is still consensus valid, and if you can find somebody that relays it, that's fine. Like I have no control over that. And again, that's what is interesting about mempool policy, is it's really just about the individual node runner having control over what they have in their mempool. And I'm not sure why it's been so contentious by core and why they care so much about what other people do with their mempool. That part I haven't figured out. I don't know why they care so much about what people do with their mempool.
Well, from my perspective here, the way I kind of see it is like, what is the difference between consensus and mempool? Because clearly the consensus part of kind of the core of this whole thing is that everybody agrees that these are the rules that we follow here within Bitcoin. If you don't like that, then go use something else or try to fork Bitcoin. I see consensus and mempool. I think that they should be very similar in the sense that what goes into mempools should be uniform. And maybe I'm not saying that that's my take on it, my perspective and my opinion on it, but I feel like why would it be different, I guess, is my question there. That's kind of maybe what I'm asking, is like, why do we agree on certain things within Bitcoin, but then certain things you have the ability to change? Like that doesn't really make sense. Maybe not logically from my perspective, is why do some things get in here for some people, but some don't at this layer, but at this layer they do? That's where I'm kind of maybe missing the point here, missing the plot. I don't know. And I feel like maybe that's where I lean a little bit more towards core, in the sense that if we all agree on the rules here, then everybody should agree on the rules here. And you shouldn't get to just decide this person gets to put this in here and this person doesn't put that in there. Like that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe I'm missing something though.
Yeah, so you're sort of saying like, why is there a difference between mempool policy and like base layer code policy of what is allowed and what is not allowed? And it's sort of, I think there's a reason for like the space in between the two, so that Bitcoin consensus can be really broad, and then within there's the ability for users to be able to choose what they want to include or not. So it's creating optionality with something that is intentionally broad, like the Bitcoin blockchain. Yeah, and so there's kind of like, is there a good reason? Is there a good reason for everybody's mempool to look the same? If we all agree what consensus is, and then we can just make mempool policy exactly like consensus, is there an advantage to that? And the advantage would be really fast relaying and propagation of transactions from node to node, right? Because we'd all have the exact same mempool. But I think that optionality is actually not a good thing. Or sorry, I think that optionality is a good thing, to be able to pick and choose, right? Because the base layer is really open. It allows for things that you might not agree with. So by being able to configure your own mempool and what goes in there, you can have a choice. And I don't think that the idea of faster propagation is really that important. Like transactions will get propagated enough through the mempool.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's my main concern at all. It's like even if it takes a little bit longer and that's the right way to do it, then that's fine. Like that's if I was concerned with speed, I would be in what, Caspa? But
well, they don't care at all about spam. They want spam because that's financial transactions, and if they don't
right.
get financial transactions in the next 2 weeks, they're dead basically.
My
Not quite, but yeah.
Yeah, my point is like, what is the benefit to everybody's mempool looking different? I guess that's the question that I have is like, what's the point of that? If the miner's at the end of the day the one who gets to decide which transactions are actually put into a block, what does it matter if all the mempools are different, or what does it matter if I'm storing this but Rajat's storing that on his mempool? Like that's the point that I'm like struggling with here. And from that perspective, I think it does make more sense that everybody's kind of on the same page. Is this what we let in? This what we don't let in? And maybe that's where this is eventually going to, where it could be more than just what it is today in terms of maybe a soft fork or a hard fork or whatever that looks like down the road. I don't know. But from my perspective, it kind of just seems like if we agree on this, then why doesn't everybody just agree with it? Why does everybody's look different?
Well, one thing that's interesting here is that you can change the configurability of the mempool without doing a soft fork or a hard fork. So that allows for some differing of opinion without actually fully forking or changing something really drastic. So that's the other benefit of it too, is it gives this space where people can have varying degrees of opinion and without actually fully forking off. I think that's a really added big benefit, right? So you can feel like you have some autonomy of what you're doing here. But you're sort of pointing out like, what is the point of having a ununiform mempool if it's just going to end up in the block anyway? Which is a really interesting point. And I think the reason, so there's a couple different reasons. One reason is if you are a miner, you do have some say in what ends up in the block in the blockchain based on what your mempool looks like.
Right.
So that does have an effect. The other thing is you're relaying information, right? So you're relaying transactions. So if you're not relaying a transaction and you're connected to a peer that's a miner and they're getting their transactions directly from you, it's a very dumbed down version. I'm sure they're going to get their transactions elsewhere as well, but they won't mine in a block with transactions that they haven't gotten because they don't have them, right? So that's another thing, is the relaying of this. The other thing here too is there's an argument to be made about being complacent and compliant with transferring data around that might be illegal. How much of that argument is really fully fleshed out or justified, I'm not sure. But if you say somebody has created a transaction that has illicit imagery within it, and you've taken that in, you've accepted it in your mempool, and you're also relaying it to other people, you're much more complicit than if you took that in and just not based on what it is, but based on how much data it takes up in a certain place, you've filtered that out and gotten rid of it out of your mempool, and you're not relaying that around and you're not holding that in your mempool, then you are much less complacent. You can say, from my best effort, I tried to get rid of this exploit in this thing that I use as a financial monetary network that is being used to store and transmit data, like a cloud storage system that 20,000 other people are now all storing this image on here that actually is illegal to own, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's like all of that can be kind of seen of how important that is, but like I think the argument of making like as best of an effort as you personally can to not participate in that is probably could go a long way in some respect, either just optically or legally, potentially.
Yeah, that's fair. And that was the other thing that I was trying to kind of think through myself, in the sense of like, if this does play out and the majority still runs core, and then all of a sudden something does get put into the mempool, and a lot of people shows up in their servers and they're storing a copy of it. What are the implications of that if the media runs with it and people are all of a sudden scared to run nodes? Obviously that's going to have a negative effect on the network in the sense that less people will be running nodes because they don't want to have to deal with the implications of that. But like, then what happens from there? Let's say that the amount of nodes actually does shrink from 25,000 to 25. And then are those 25 node runners now responsible for what's on there? Are they legally responsible for, are they going to want to take on that risk? And if not, I feel like the overall value prop of Bitcoin really deflates itself. And the people who have Bitcoin and are incentivized for this thing to succeed, why would they want that to happen?
Yeah.
Like, is that a possibility in the sense of like something happens and then people are like, holy shit, I'm not running a node anymore. So they shut it down and all of a sudden we go down a cliff in terms of reachable nodes. And then there's like way less people running a node, and then the value prop has fallen. But there's a lot of people out there with a lot of money and capital in Bitcoin. And I feel like all of the institutions in Wall Street are hoping that this thing succeeds. Like, I just don't really understand the incentives of that.
It's possible. It's possible. And I think that, if we look at that post that, that news article about BSV, right? Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, which there's many reasons why you would not want to be associated with that thing. But one of them is they changed the op return to 100 kilobytes, the same thing that, that Bitcoin Core wants to do with their next update. And immediately, oh my God. Sorry.
What happened there?
It's just hitting me with a bunch of ads and stuff. My apologies. Okay, here we go. Op return exploited immediately. I think it was the same day or the next day or something. Child abuse imagery. As soon as they changed the up to 100 kilobyte for the op return limits. So, and BBC made an article about this as well. So exactly what you're talking about, the news will latch onto something like this. Bitcoin is a much bigger deal than BSV, which is, there's many reasons why it's going to zero, but this could contribute to the reason it's going to zero, right? The other thing about this was in 2019. So the other thing that happens with BSV is like I think their blockchain is like 20 terabytes or something. So who's actually running a node of that? Almost nobody. But I'm running a node. I'm running a Bitcoin node. Jory, you're running a Bitcoin node. If all of a sudden there ends up being stuff like that in there, and there's a narrative, and people are saying, well, there might even be threats of legal action, or just the narrative of optically being like, oh, now you're associated with something like this. There's any sort of friction, right? Like there's already a technical friction to running a Bitcoin node. There's financial friction. Now there's like an optical friction to running a node. Now it's not like, because people do it altruistically. There's not a financial incentive to run a node. There's sort of
negative, actually.
Yeah. So there's sort of a sovereignty aspect or incentive to run it, and a privacy aspect to run it. But then all of a sudden there's this additional friction where you're associated with being some type of criminal, right? That could restrict and that could just limit a lot of people wanting to run a node. And I think that's totally possible. And this article like basically made me want to talk about this thing a lot more, because it's hard to talk about this subject. It's very technical. There's a lot of things I'm probably getting like slightly wrong, or things I don't understand. I'm not an incredibly technical person. I've become way more technical over the last year as I've learned stuff, but I'm still missing tons of shit, I'm sure. And seeing that this has happened to another fork of Bitcoin, and the implications of that happening to to Bitcoin that actually matters, right? Like Bitcoin actually matters. BSV does not matter whatsoever. Bitcoin actually matters. And if this could not destroy Bitcoin, but just make it less sound in some way, even if it's just people's perception of it, I think that's really worth looking at. I think that's worth evaluating whether this is the right choice or not to make.
That's the point that I was going to make, because when I saw that, the first thing I thought of was like, okay, let's just play this out hypothetically right now. I know that this is, there's a lot of people who might say, well, Bitcoin mechanic, you're kind of way out to lunch with this. This would never happen. But clearly this isn't a hypothetical thing. This actually did happen in 2019. So we've seen it happen before. This isn't something that could happen. It has happened before.
Mhm.
When I think about how not necessarily Bitcoin, the network, could be destroyed, but how Bitcoiners themselves could be destroyed, in the sense of, when I think of like Peter McCormick, when he got involved with the fake Satoshi, the Craig Wright guy, and all he was doing, all that he was trying to do there was actually say, hey, no, you're an idiot. You're definitely not Satoshi here. And that turned into like 4 or 5 years and millions of dollars of his life destroyed.
Mhm.
And so I think that if something like this did happen, and again, I'm not worried about the network overall. I do think that this is going to be here for the next hundreds, thousands of years. It will find a way to get through it. But if people understood how scarce this asset was, and they were looking for a way to come after people who had Bitcoin, and node runners to me are arguably people who are, pretty invested into Bitcoin. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be running a node. I could see something like this turning into just a nightmare for people. Not that it will, but it opens the door to something potentially like that happening. Something that I'm sure Peter never would have imagined, spending 5 years and millions of dollars on something so stupid, but it did. And these are the ways I think that if you wanted to destroy Bitcoin, you attack the people who are supporting the network.
And I think that's a really good example because, Peter made it through all of that, right? But that was a battle. Like that
Oh,
he got legally attacked, like in the legal system, right? And it cost him financially, and it was a big pain in the ass, and all this stuff, right? So Bitcoin, if we relay that analogy onto Bitcoin, Bitcoin will make it through this. Bitcoin is still the best opportunity, the best chance, the best alternative monetary network for base layer of money. That is 100% the case. But do we need to fight fights that we could avoid, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we put in this change and all of a sudden there's illicit imagery within every single person's node that's serialized, now we have to we can't roll that back. There's no way we're rolling that back. I think we shouldn't even roll that back. I know, people can debate that, I guess, but the immutability of the ledger is so important, so valuable.
right.
So, but now we have to fight this optical story of it, or the actual logistic story of it. Whereas we could have just prevented this by not making such a drastic change in the first place. If that's a possibility, we should really evaluate that. That's all we're saying here. I think that's all the vast majority of people that have switched to knots is saying here is we need to reevaluate this. Why is this a change that's happening so quickly? Are there ulterior incentives to change it? What's the motives behind it? Is there compromised individuals? What's the story here? This story seems fishy to me. It seems so fishy that I'm going to go and use a fork of this implementation that has been so trusted, that is maintained by one person with a controversial past. That's not something that everybody does lightly, right? That's kind of a drastic move.
100%.
So why are people doing a drastic move? It's because they feel like that's the best option, because the other thing that's happening they disagree with so much.
And it's not even like there's a few people doing it. It's 18%.
Yes, thousands of people.
4,200 nodes.
Well, we just lost our unbiased badge here.
Well, I'm just saying, again, I'm not saying that Core is wrong or Knots is right or anything. I'm just saying we just need to evaluate what is even being asked here of the change. That's all I care. That shouldn't be biased. That should just be, hey, we should question what's happening. I think that's what a lot of people are doing. They're questioning what's happening. And people have jumped onto one side or the other and rooted in and made it political, well, of course, which is going to happen because it is on the social layer. A lot of this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are just asking the question, is this the right choice?
And there hasn't been a great answer.
No.
That's the biggest thing that I suffer with right now myself, is I'm definitely somebody who wants to see every possible side. And that's why I thought it was a good idea to have this conversation today, to just like talk through it, because I think you go crazy just watching videos and having nobody to discuss it with, or watching videos and adding your comments in there and thinking that that has any sort of relevance or, you know, meaningful impact on it. So that is really, I think, the core of what I was trying to do with this conversation, is just have a better understanding of what it is. I think I've gained a little bit of more. I've actually, this might be weird to say, but I can kind of see both sides a little bit more clearly from my eyes. But at the end of the day, it is still personal preference. I do think that people should be able to choose in terms of which software they run. That's a beauty of Bitcoin, and I hope that never changes. And yeah, do you guys have any more topics? I mean, we're an hour and a half into this right now. Do you guys have any more topics that you think that are important to discuss within this?
I think it's important to understand that these small changes might seem irrelevant now, but the point that at least the point that I've seen people trying to make is that they could have a domino effect into something really big, right? And let's say, for example, if the child abuse pictures show up on Bitcoin, what that leads to is fewer people running nodes. And if fewer people run nodes, that means that the network or the blockchain could potentially be manipulated, and you have to go to some kind of institution that will allow you to verify your transactions for a fee, and you have to basically trust somebody else. You can't do it all on your own, right? It seems like it's so far from what this minor change today could be, but again, the downstream effects of this could be massive, and they could be nasty, right? It could mean that Bitcoin is no longer a sovereign money. Bitcoin is now a money that only institutions control or governments control. And I guarantee you that governments would be willing to do something like this, where they put something that you shouldn't have on your computer on the Bitcoin blockchain, and in order to go after people who try to get past their inflation, right? If anybody who has adopted Bitcoin, their goal most of the time is to avoid inflation, right? That's my goal. I don't want to deal with inflation. And this is almost like a vector for them to punish those people.
Yeah.
Right. Again, it seems crazy. It seems so far-fetched. It seems like, no, there's no way that this is the case. How are you even coming to this conclusion? But it's not like psyops happen overnight, right? They happen over decades. And who knows what this could lead to in the future? Maybe this is what actually kills Bitcoin.
Yeah. And so I would also just say, as one other note here, is people need to look into this themselves and try to make up their own mind on it. And the best way to do that is to look at the arguments being made and completely ignore the individual attacks on the people, because that is a lot of what the arguments are made of right now. They're saying, oh, if you're talking about child abuse being put in the blockchain, that says something about you, and that means that that's something connected to you, and like, why would you think about that? It's like, dude, people are going to think about the worst thing somebody can do to attack what they find valuable. That's just a personal attack, right? So I would try to look through all of the arguments being made on both sides and try to just not connect the personal attacks going on, because there's a ton of that, and a lot of it's unjustified. I would say like 99% of it's unjustified on both sides.
Yeah, and I think that I've kind of downplayed this myself on my channel, because I didn't have enough information. I wasn't, knowledgeable enough to influence other people, and so I just kind of held back and maybe downplayed it a little bit too much. And I think that from my perspective, I don't think that I shouldn't say anybody, but the majority of people on Bitcoin Core, I think they would agree with the majority of things that we're saying. And that's why I have such a big disconnect there, because I don't think they want Bitcoin to fail. I don't think they want bad images on the blockchain. I don't, and that's why I'm trying to understand like why they would want to push something like this through. If they understand the implications of this, they probably understand it better than I do myself. So that's where my whole disconnect here is. But the other part of that too is like the reason why, probably the thing that actually led me to Bitcoin was seeing how many, we talk about illegal things and images and stuff like that, but the fiat system actually is what really creates the incentives and allows for that whole world to even happen. And so that's what led me to Bitcoin myself, is because I realized that this stuff is happening. This stuff is really scary. It's horrible. It's horrific. It actually changed my life. I think the day I learned about how much bad things were happening in this world, I think my life changed forever in terms of the children, the human trafficking, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully this doesn't affect the channel here, but I don't want that world to be somehow to destroy this one, which I thought was a way out of that world that was going to somehow, I thought, could end that and change the incentives and change the way we interact with each other and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just kind of weird to me that they're colliding right now in a very weird way. And I'm having a hard time deciding who's right, who's wrong, why they're doing this, why they're doing that. So I agree with Forrest. I think that take whatever we said today with a grain of salt, figure it out, do as much research on this as possible, I think, because you might think it's a big deal or not, and I might think the same or not, but that doesn't really matter what I think. It should be your decision. It's your node. This to me is more important than a vote at the polls. And if you are somebody who believes in the future of Bitcoin and wants this to succeed, you have to take this stuff seriously.
I think the other thing I just want to say too is like, I've seen a lot of people like react to this kind of news and think, oh, wow, Bitcoin is very much less secure than I thought it was. So I'm just going to sell it all. I didn't know any of it. I thought it was perfect money, all of this. Right. I would really avoid making crazy quick decisions like that will financially impact you like crazy as well. Yeah. So that's just another little caveat there.
Well, should we do some final thoughts here? Do we have anything else? I think we covered the majority of things on the list there.
Yeah, I think we covered everything. I think we went pretty in depth on a lot of these.
Yeah, I think we're good. I'm sure there's lots that we've missed, and we'll probably have to make another video at some point. But yeah, it's an ongoing story, and we're a part of this. We're a part of this piece of history of Bitcoin at this point with what we've done. Yeah, we're one block in this blockchain.
Yeah. And maybe that's where my final words and kind of what's, emotionally detracted me from either side really is just all the negative energy towards it. Like it doesn't seem like anybody's really willing to have a conversation and really explain things to the average person. The average person isn't going to go into GitHub and read the comments in there. They're just not. Mm-hmm. And I really wish that we would have somebody. I know that they've tried to have some debates back and forth, but even so, like this kind of stuff for somebody like me is so far above my pay grade here and understanding of this, how whole thing works. I think that I'm a better Bitcoiner because of this thing, which is kind of weird to say. Just trying to listen to both sides at a Bitcoin layer and just at a social layer, I think of trying to hear both sides and really dive deep into why they're doing this. And, at the end of the day, you really do just have to trust your gut, because you're going to see a lot of things on each side. Some things are going to make sense over here. Some things are going to make sense over here. And I think that that's what I'm going to end up doing myself, is just trusting my gut and what makes the most sense to me. And then, keep your mind open. I think that's the most important part. And that's kind of where we started today, is like, even if we're wrong about this, we look back in a couple of years from now and we ended up being wrong. I think that it's the same as Bitcoin. Even if this thing goes to zero, even if it fails, if we're wrong about one thing, at least you can say that your heart was in the right place, whatever that is. And I think that that's the most important part of this whole story to me anyways.
Yeah.
So probably the longest video we've done. Most videos are 10, 15, 20 minutes long, but to the people who made it this far, thanks for watching. Hopefully you got something from it. I don't know if we confused you more or less or whatever it is, but I think either way, it's important to just talk this stuff out, get it out there, and then you can kind of just decide for yourself. So thanks, fellas, for another one. We will talk to you on the next one.